Welcome back. You're watching the SABC News Channel, and we're counting down to an important announcement at 6 o'clock this evening at the Results Operations Centre in Pretoria. And we believe it's going to be a declaration of the results of this year's elections. And we'll wait and see, because the smaller parties have taken the IEC to task and threatening legal action, and the IEC is saying that we're going to fight back, we're going to fight that legal action, saying that half of it's actually illegal. But anyway, 6 o'clock, that's what we believe is going to be happening, something at the IEC Centre in Pretoria. So building up to that, we're taking a look at now all of the voting districts across the country have now come in, and so we can start to look at them and start to try and make sense of what those stories are. Let's go to the Eastern Cape right now and take a look at the picture there. And if you are in the Eastern Cape and you are on the list there, these are the predicted seats using the CSIR's modelling. The ANC there with 44 seats available to them from 63. The DA, the official opposition, with 10 seats there. The EFF sitting with 5. UDM 2, ATM, one of the new parties, the African Transformation Movement, and you'll know, was their strategist there was Mzwanele Mani. All right, let's take a look at how the votes went there in the Eastern Cape. And after 100% of the voting districts are now being counted, just under 60% of the people turned out to vote. And the ANC getting a healthy majority there, 68.7. But it has to be seen in the context that it was over 70 in the previous elections. So down, but certainly still the dominant party in the Eastern Cape legislature. The DA in second place with 15.7%, and the EFF 7.8%. So the EFF having a following across the country, doing better in some provinces than others, but certainly a party that is consolidating its position as a key voice in South African politics. All right, we'll explore that a little bit more in a short while. In the meantime, political analysts say that it's in the best interests of the IEC and the country to ensure that there's no doubt about the credibility and integrity of the outcomes of the elections. This, as the IEC has commissioned the Statistician General to conduct a full audit of complaints. Some political parties allege that some voters might have voted more than once in certain voting districts.
The mainstream opposition parties such as the DA, COPE, ACDP and the UDM joined other small parties in raising reservations about some processes during the election. The IEC agreed to go ahead with an audit to ensure the fairness of the process. Analysts say it's the right thing to do.
Election procedures are similar to judicial procedures, where perceptions that it was fair are as important as the facts. So the IEC is highly respected both in our African continent and nationally, and it certainly has nothing to lose by inviting another outside audit to take a comb through all the procedures. If there's any loopholes, if they're serious, they can rerun the election in certain districts. If they're not serious, they can tighten them up before our 2021 municipal elections.
Gorchak says with so many parties contesting this year's election, it was inevitable that such objections were going to arise.
It's only human that many of the losers will always feel something wasn't fair and will appeal against the results, and that's just part of the game of elections, which I'm sure most of us accept.
Meanwhile, Parliament says it is ready to swear in new members as soon as the results have been announced. The provisional date for the first sitting of the 6th Parliament is scheduled for the 22nd of this month. The Chief Justice will preside over the swearing in of new members before they elect a new president of the country among themselves. Manilisi Duwase, SABC News, Parliament.
Right, so let's continue to talk with our analyst, Angelo Fick. Angelo, what do you make of this fight back by the smaller parties against this, saying that this was not free and fair? Yes, there may have been some instances where this ink was not as indelible as we thought, but to go from there to that this election is null and void, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think firstly we must remember that these parties all signed the Electoral Code of Conduct, and there are specific requirements in that of how party officials behave in relation to the IEC, and calling the IEC's credibility into question before the entire process has been completed internally is, I think, disingenuous and deeply dangerous in a democratic space that remains as fragile as South Africa's remains at some points in its everyday working out. That aside, it is possible to imagine that people are unhappy with their results and genuinely believe, that there has been a series of things going on that explains their result that isn't about voters not choosing them. However, because of the way in which this process works, several things would have had to come together in an elaborate conspiracy for this to have been pulled off. In other words, the IEC, all the observers, the three major parties, all would have had to conspire with police officers, with people on the ground, with millions of voters, to effect the kind of consequence that these people say is what has now happened. That they were treated unfairly by a conspiracy of forces that the IEC is the center of. Nowhere in the world is such a conspiracy possible, because not only do they have party agents, but citizens would have seen this happening in their voting stations and would have put much more of this in the public domain and would have declared this to the IEC. If the IEC, and there are all sorts of problems with its conduct around the ability to open stations on time, the ability to have indelible ink that lasts, all of that happens, and scanners that work. But if they are willing to get an auditing firm in, which they announced on Thursday, if I remember correctly, the question is why you would call for a separate independent audit afterwards, because the IEC did not say it would audit its own material. It said it would call in an independent audit firm to check the process for itself. Then to call the second audit is to suggest that the IEC didn't call for the first audit. And that's, I think, again, to plant the idea, and we live in a world of post-truth politics, where once the story is out, it now becomes the duty of the rest of us to prove that the thing that we all agreed was a desk isn't a giraffe. To say that the IEC is not a revolutionary institution is to describe, a coffee table as a giraffe, and to say, now let's all discuss how this is not a giraffe. No one has ever said that the IEC is a revolutionary institution. We all know that the IEC is an institution of state that works not for parties, but for citizens. And so it is important when we critique the IEC, just like when we critique the judiciary, we critique it in order to strengthen it if we have an interest in multi-party democracy, in separation of powers in governance, and in accountability. If we have no such interest, but our interests are in power, then perhaps some of our critiques would be as, shall we say, counterproductive as they have been. If one wants to destabilize a system, one makes the sort of critiques that one has heard from some quarters. If one is interested in strengthening the system to the advantage of citizens, the critiques are there to be made, but they ought to be made constructively. And this isn't some kind of bourgeois centrist approach. This is, if you have a future for this country in mind that isn't one of chaos and kind of hearsay evidence counting as the truth, then one should play by the rules that one has signed off on in the Electoral Code of Conduct.
And I would imagine also, to get a seat, we're talking 43,000 votes or so. So that would mean, just to get one seat, they've got to collude with 43,000 people around the country, because they couldn't do it in one place. And then that would mean that in each voting site, all of those checks and balances have to have collapsed.
Right.
For it to be able to, and they'd need to know which ones.
And then, of course, you have to conspire with science, because again, this is about, if people are doing this, then certainly if people double voted, then the turnout would be lower than it is. If the turnout is lower than it is, why would it advantage the larger parties in the way that it did? And why would larger parties, if they are in on a conspiracy, concede the kinds of losses that they have? So this is an issue of understanding the mathematics and the statistics and the formulae by which these things are calculated, and you would need a conspiracy that, couldn't even be written into a Hollywood blockbuster.
All right, we've run out of time, but if you can answer this briefly, how important is the signal in the first cabinet that Cyril Ramaphosa announces?
It's going to be very significant to ordinary South Africans that it either shows a commitment to all of the principles that his party indicated was why they should be returned to power, which was a rejection of corruption, a commitment to deal with it, and an intolerance of malfeasance and maladministration. If that cabinet contains people who were implicated in any of these and have been mentioned and haven't yet accounted, many South Africans will lose their confidence for the second or third time that the new dawn is in fact a new dawn and not just sunrise on yet another day exactly like yesterday.
All right, okay. We'll pause for thought there. We're going to be back in a short while at the top of the hour as we continue this rolling coverage, working our way towards 6 o'clock, where we're expecting a big announcement from the Results Operations Centre in Pretoria. Stay with us.